In this lesson, we're going to be talking about cross-site scripting. Cross-site scripting actually is a bit of a misnomer almost. What it really is the ability to have scripts execute from inside form fields in a web application. So there's a lot of value in doing that, although what you usually see to prove it is just popping up an alert box, which isn't particularly interesting. What you can use it for, though, is to manipulate the page and also grab data from the user's machine, whether it's cookies or whether it's some other type of information that JavaScript has access to or another scripting language has access to. That's what cross-site scripting is really all about. The goal of cross-site scripting is primarily to obtain information and to do malicious things. Now, there's a couple of different kinds of cross-site scripting. One type of cross-site scripting is what we call persistent cross-site scripting. Persistent cross-site scripting simply means that it's stored somewhere that it can be retrieved later on. Non-persistent cross-site scripting means that the script element needs to be plugged into the form field at the time that the page is accessed. So there needs to be some sort of social engineering attack that goes along with that type of cross-site scripting. So if I were to just do some testing for cross-site scripting, what I may do is something like this, and just see whether I can actually get this to execute here. As I said, the alert box is kind of the classic check for cross-site scripting, and I'm going to see whether that actually works or not, and I get an error back. So because I ran a scan on this earlier, this actually says that guessnum5.php is something that's vulnerable to cross-site scripting. So I can go back to my browser here, and it says guessnum5.php was the page that was vulnerable. Oh, and this is really helpful because it has information about the database query that's being used. So you can actually see the query that's being used here. And we'll get into SQL attacks a little bit later on. So let's try it here. Let's try the same attack here in the search field. And that attack actually worked. So that field is vulnerable to cross-site scripting. So you can see it popped up an alert dialog box that said hi, just as I had told it to with this script here. Now imagine if that script was doing something like grabbing a cookie and transmitting it back to somewhere so that somebody may be able to log into, for example, Amazon on your behalf. Now, Amazon, I'm not saying is vulnerable to that type of attack. I'm just using it as an example of something that an attacker may be able to do would be to potentially log in as you to another website if there were other conditions that were available, like the cookie was vulnerable to not being associated with a particular machine, for example. So we'll talk about cookies in a subsequent lesson. But that's really what cross-site scripting is all about, is the ability to plug JavaScript or VBScript or some other type of scripting language that the browser supports into a form field and having it execute. And that's really the essence of cross-site scripting. And as I said, there's a lot of potential really negative ramifications to applications that don't have protections against that.